Thanks very much, Damon, and thanks to all of you for being here. I'm really delighted to have the chance to have this conversation with Xiao Qiang and David Lin on what is really a fast-moving and critical issue for democracy. The International Forum has been working on the intersection of AI and democracy for some time, but it's such a rapidly moving area that I'm sure there will be a thing or two that I learned today during this conversation. A quick housekeeping note, we will begin with a 45-minute, roughly, public panel, followed by the opportunity for a bit of a private conversation for some more engagement with those of you here in the room. And so please be thinking of your questions. So, Xiao, beginning with you, we're here today to talk about LLMs, but there is this much longer standing struggle between the CCP and its desire to control and censor information and free-thinking people in China and even around the world who are trying to express different points of view. So to situate us a bit, tell us about what brought you to that struggle, because you have a really compelling personal story here, and how you and your colleagues in civil society see your role in exposing and countering CCP censorship.
Personally, it's even one deeper, right? I grew up in China through the Cultural Revolution, and I remember it was in 1970s, family gathering. My family also being persecuted, as my parents are intellectuals. After the Cultural Revolution, everybody's life was being disrupted, and then went through the misery, and the family get together in just my grandmother, my parents, and some relatives, and my grandmother cried out, saying, "Because of Cultural Revolution, now I don't have where to live." And every relative, including my parents, like, no, you cannot say that. Absolutely not. This is in the family. And my grandmother said, "I don't have a place to live because of disruption." And I was, 9. I remember that so clearly, because why she cannot say that? What stopped people to say that my grandma couldn't live in the family? My parents prevent her to say that because that will get her in trouble. So speaking truth in the authoritarian regime and totalitarian regime is, in my entire experience in China, even later on socially opening up, even later on that there's a reform opening this, but that kind of political repressiveness never left me, not only in my memory, and Tiananmen called me back, because that's a struggle for people's desire for freedom and truth. Then fast forward for 30-some years, and this year, 35 years, 36 years, I've been doing the same thing. Just the beginning of the video, we heard the saying, "The democracy is the calling of our time." I live in California. I heard this, the internet time, the connected time, the information time, the data time. Of course, now it's AI time. The time changing fast, but guess what? It's still democracy is calling our time. People want to choose. People seek for truth. That nature of struggle has never changed. What China Digital Times do? China Digital Times is trying to make those invisible visible, trying to make those suppressed voices being heard and being amplified. And we're trying to build this sort of knowledge-sharing database, or the collaboration that to expose the suppression, the manipulation of the authoritarian regime, the CCP, put on Chinese people all the time. But guess what? This is not just the China struggle, right? Over these decades, and actually I want to thank, again, National Endowment for Democracy to bring me very often into the network of colleagues of the worldwide struggle for freedom expression, freedom of social association, for your democratic election, and to make me realize that information freedom anywhere actually strengthening the democracy everywhere. And this is not just about China. It's the enterprise of humanity. So I'll just say that.
Thank you so much for those powerful opening remarks and this idea of making suppressed voices able to be heard. I think that's so central to our work, not only in China, but around the globe. David, I want to turn to you now. Damon mentioned in his opening remarks the great work done by SCSP, and your primary focus is on strategic competition, but SCSP also platforms some really powerful voices for democracy and human rights in Hong Kong and Taiwan, and generally kind of people who are standing up to the PRC's digital authoritarianism. And I wonder if you could help us open up with just a few thoughts on the intersection of the strategic competition between democracies and the PRC and the cause of democracy and human rights.
For sure. Thank you, Beth. And thanks again to NED for having me. It's a great privilege to be here. And Xiao Qiang also, I have to say, in my early days of China watching, one of the things that I always loved and looked forward to finding on CDT were we were talking a little bit about this off stage, were the party directives on censorship that gave us a window into the precise language and the intent behind some of the censorship regulations in terms of like keywords that the party was looking for to wipe off the internet. I always thought that was...
I don't want to steal the credit. The copyright is theirs.
Okay, yes, that's right, that's right. Always respectful to intellectual property, so good. No, but back to the question, Beth. Maybe it deserves some standing back here where, you know, Xiao, you were talking about the age of the internet and how we're now in the age of AI. You know, back in the early days of the internet was seen as a democratizing force, right? Like, I think it was President Clinton back in the 90s said, you know, like, trying to control the internet is trying to nail Jello to the wall. Right? And I think, you know, without admiring China's system, but I think we can say today, China has done a remarkable job nailing Jello to the wall. I mean, they've built this great firewall internet control apparatus. They can control information flows to a degree that no one could have expected when the internet first came about. And that is, I think, a testament to both the intent and the reach and the capability that the party is willing to go to enforce its vision of censorship around the world. I think the age of AI supercharges all of this. And this is, I'm sure, a topic we can unpack throughout the discussion. But in the age of AI, large language models are not just like websites with information on them where, you know, people write things or get content censored. But AI models, large language models, are really the foundation for which a lot of future technologies, a lot of future applications will be built on top of them. So initial emerging technologies built around AI, we're already seeing, and we're already seeing how that can be used and exploited by autocracies. Surveillance technology, facial recognition, voice recognition, even gait recognition, you know, patterns or trends in the way people walk are able to, governments are able to use artificial intelligence to identify people down to those kinds of very personal attributes. So when strategic competition, so at the root of it, I think strategic competition is really about values and how those values, those governance values reflect themselves in technology going forward. And so just to tee it up for now, it's the question at hand is really about like what values do we want to guide the future of technological development? Authoritarian ones or you know, liberal democratic ones, and AI by itself as a technology, kind of value agnostic, is already poised to reshape the way we live our lives. And so that is just an added layer of complexity going forward.
So I really like this idea of thinking about how AI, it can be at the base of other things. So actually it's a chance for values that are baked in one way or another to be inserted in ways that we can't always see. And thank you also for mentioning the surveillance tech, because the fact that AI also includes things that aren't chatbots and don't talk to you is one of my personal hobby horses, and we'll come back to that later. But for now, I want to start with LLMs. So LLMs and censorship, it's a complicated topic, right? Because initially when we were kind of in the early days of Gen AI enthusiasm, specifically for these new AI chatbots that talk to you and generate content rather than just identifying patterns or things that older machine learning tools would do, there was some sense that this would be a good thing for more open societies, because for various reasons, authoritarians were inherently at a disadvantage. Maybe the unpredictability of the models would scare them, right? Because they don't always say what you would expect them to say. Or maybe the lack of training data due to censorship would create problems. But on the other hand, if you're a censor and you have access to an LLM, it enables you to do more sophisticated, potentially more pervasive things. Instead of just doing a keyword search, you could say, find all the opinions that are critical of Xi Jinping and go looking for them, for instance. So it seems like with the DeepSeek breakthrough, the early, the CCP and the PRC more broadly are stuck sort of lagging behind on this one. That theory is called a bit into question, right? So how would each of you see this trade-off between risks and opportunities for authoritarian censors when it comes to large language models? Has the CCP succeeded in kind of threading that needle, and are they going to be able to, in fact, be pushing an authoritarian model of Gen AI in the future?
More than thread the needle, CCP actually saw and see the immense potential that AI will empower them for social control and mind control, control what's thinkable, more than censorship as a suppression, but censorship as a generation. It is true, at the very beginning, when ChatGPT just came out, there is I wouldn't say panic, but unease from the Chinese propaganda department, CAC, the Cyberspace Administration of China, immediately, because they do see what Beth just mentioned. This generative AI is probabilistic, and also has this vast knowledge from all over the internet. Those large language models, how do you control that? So they put out their regulation almost right away, right? 2023 in May. But guess what? The Chinese internet companies, the AI companies, are very ready for the censorship. They already had decades of experiences and the technologies and all the keywords and all the topics and what need to be censored and what need to be as a propaganda. They are all, and technology expert already. They understand you give AI the training data, poison data, yeah, then it come out seamlessly. It's not even just the lack of knowledge. It's just sort of omission, but doesn't even know those certain things exist. You give the front end control. Yeah, you can trace those prompts, what you ask. And there's a number of ways they can immediately put it in, and they have all the materials attacked already. And then they go to CAC, say, look, this is our model. It will work just for your needs. That's one expertise Chinese tech companies have. And the next step, there's DeepSeek. There's other loads of Chinese models are ready for application, right? At Silicon Valley, again, these big companies are talking about AGI, generated, the general intelligence will racing to there and this and that. I'm not sure China is right now racing to AGI as fast as Silicon Valley, but China's tech companies certainly capable of putting out a large scale everyday applications empowered by censored AI, by the AI seamlessly embedded the Communist Party's ideology and mind control. It's already happening. What's the next? Exporting to the world, all over the places.
And David, what would you make from your standpoint at SCSP of kind of the state of play? Where are we with the development and export of this censored AI right now?
Yeah, I mean, from the China perspective, and I don't probably need to explain this to this room, but I think it's understood that from the China perspective, censorship is not a black and white thing, and it is not binary in the sense that the Great Firewall is porous in many respects, right?
Yeah.
China allows what it needs to come through and blocks other things that it doesn't want to come through. And so I think Beijing has adopted a similar approach when it comes to developing LLMs. For example, I remember when I was posted in China, most foreigners, even some Chinese locals, use virtual private networks or VPNs to access the internet outside of China. And I remember when I was using VPNs inside of China, you feel very sneaky. You're like, oh, I'm bypassing the Great Firewall. But then comes, a sensitive time, in Chinese politics, like the October plenum or some sensitive political event, and then your VPN stops working, and you're like, oh, wait, why doesn't it work anymore? Because I thought this was my secret way to bypass Chinese internet controls. But then it makes you realize that Chinese internet censors are allowing VPNs to be usable because they understand how it could be an inconvenience to a lot of people inside of China. And they're now, during the sensitive times, closing down VPNs because it's heightened sensitivity times. My point being that this is a choice. Beijing has a very agile, adaptive approach towards censorship that allows them to take what they need and block other things that they don't want people to see inside of China. And they're adopting the same approach to LLMs. And so I think they're willing to take risks in allowing some of the anomalies or what they perceive as democratic language or values or whatever kind of come through between the nets because they see value in taking that information to turn it into their own. So.
And in terms of the potential value that they see in LLMs, Xiao, one thing that you mentioned that I've heard from you before is this idea of censorship can also be generative. So one concern, especially as we think about the risk of the globalization of information controls, not just for people inside China, is what censored content in the PRC internet means for AI training, right? If you have and this is also true of other languages where most speakers live under dictatorship. If you have a dearth of content in that language that's allowed to stay up, that's about, for instance, human rights abuses by the government, and you have a lot of state-generated propaganda, then if AI models, even potentially AI models being trained here, are sweeping up that data, the censorship may end up influencing them kind of at the gut level. So what are the risks that you see in terms of PRC censorship influencing the development of AI more broadly and the kind of export of speech controls in that context?
Yeah, there are so many levels, but also David was just talking about his VP experience. I want to add a little bit more on that a Chinese state Great Firewall has a technical capacity of shutting down the VPN service at a critical time, and the time, particularly like during the white paper movement and all of that. But also, they do want to reduce and suppress the general expanding VPN demand inside of China. When they find that it's too hard for them to close down everything, guess what? They took the market. More than 2/3 of Chinese VPN service right now are state-run and state-penetrated VPN. They're not VPNs anymore. Your data is not private, to the Chinese state. And even you use those VPNs, which I heard so many people inside of China say, hey, I still cannot see China Geo Times. What's wrong? Well, check your VPN, where you download it. For the AI, the same. The Chinese authority always to do this. If they cannot control it, they cannot directly control OpenAI or Google. They created them themselves. They took the market. And now the Chinese tech industry, again, has a capacity. Talking about the export of the surveillance and the AI-embedded technology to other countries, right? This is more than just a surveillance. There's over 80 countries taking those Chinese technology now. It's just going to expand. It's, I would say, the philosophy of control, because the AI, on the one hand, serves the public, right? That's what it's supposed to do. But Chinese AI, from the beginning, it's for control. It's for the sort of managing the public opinion, manufacturing the consent, and to integrate all these sort of official information or ideologies seamlessly into this operation. The user doesn't even know it. And this is what Chinese AI do. And this is and when expanding globally, this level of philosophy of control, really what it was calling is the pushback or countermeasures, more than just moral resistance, but actually competing Chinese AI, authoritarian AI, out of this market. It's a global issue.
And David, in keeping with just thinking through the different ramifications of, okay, the PRC, right, part of the reason their digital authoritarianism is so relatively unique compared to others is because, as Xiao mentioned, they build their own alternatives, right? So, yeah. And a thought that you mentioned while we were planning this event was this idea of incorporating censorship up and down the tech stack. I find that a very intriguing idea. Flesh that out for us a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as recently as a few months ago, in the lead up to the 15th five-year plan, which we're expecting to see some glimmers of later this year, there are signs that a key feature of the 15th five-year plan will focus on this idea of AI plus, which is pushing AI adoption across China. And this speaks to our earlier comment about how start thinking about AI beyond what you were talking about earlier, Beth, beyond chatbots, right? Like chatbots, like the user interface that you see with OpenAI and Claude and Gemini, that's only the beginning. Now, the idea, the trajectory for AI going forward is to start integrating that kind of literal artificial intelligence into applications, think about robotics, think about autonomous vehicles, and think about also the implications that an authoritarian government's control over information, how that translates into robotics, into autonomous vehicles, and into some of these like very tangible in-your-face hardware applications. And so I guess and this discussion about like how censorship translate up and down the technology stack, I think the idea there is just try to start thinking about censorship beyond the way we traditionally think about it, which is just, you know, the redacted lines on a piece of paper, but how this can affect and translate into the way robots behave in the future, the way even autonomous drones fly in the future or cars drive in the future. This will have significant sweeping ramifications across the society as these technologies diffuse. Another point I'd like to raise is like back in 2010, the State Council issued this thing called the White Paper on the Internet, which started to introduce this idea that we now have kind of come to realize is of cyber sovereignty or data sovereignty or internet sovereignty. And the idea I remember at the time reading this white paper was just thinking how audacious it was for Beijing to believe that it could control every piece of data, every bit that crossed its borders. Now, fast forward to 2025, 15 years later, and you can trace just how methodical Beijing has been in building the regulatory architecture to make this a reality. Now, there are laws on the books, there are regulations in the books in China that require companies, both foreign companies operating in China and Chinese companies, to pass. Same with LLMs. If those LLMs were to go overseas, they have to pass cybersecurity reviews, data reviews, data security reviews. And this is the amount of control that we're talking about now, and all the more amplified by AI, and all the more amplified as AI gets incorporated into these real use cases like autonomous vehicles and those kinds of platforms. So this is how Beijing's view of censorship can translate up and down the technology stack.
It's called data sovereignty.
Yes.
Yeah, right, information sovereignty. But actually, I want to add one more word, because we talk about LLM, large language model, it's about language. It's translated to semantic sovereignty. In other words, the meaning of language, the meaning of the knowledge, that if you are embedded in the Chinese AI's world, it turns into what CCP wants you to know and believe and speak.
Absolutely. And so thank you both for kind of providing a sense of the scale of the challenge here, that there are values actually embedded even in technologies that we don't think of necessarily as conveying values. I want to stay on that point for a minute, and this is going to be the second to last round of questions before we pivot to the private discussion. So those of you who are in our in-person audience, please be thinking of your questions. This idea, so David, you mentioned autonomous vehicles, for instance, drones. Of course, there's also these suites of surveillance technologies like safe cities that the PRC is already exporting to many countries across different continents, and that have often been seen as a vector for the spread of digital authoritarianism. Xiao, I want to ask what you're seeing in terms, for instance, of the digital Silk Road and other China tech exports. What are the risks that are already confronting the democracy really globally and free-thinking people globally as a consequence of the export of these tools and of the PRC's incorporation of AI into governance technologies?
Yeah, what I said before, even the philosophy changes. That AI is not serving the people, public, but actually managing it. But let's start even from within China, that under this type of technology, as ordinary people, not to mention your activist, journalist, you're living in the permanent of, I have to say, figure out the word, agnomistic suspicion, meaning the AI can monitoring you and potentially reporting you. Think of agentic AIs, more than just keep your record. They can write a report, so they can trigger punishment by itself. That's the sort of a state control at a machine speed. Yes, China, that's the intended goal. China's not there yet, but if you look at the trajectory, nothing stopped that the PRC to get to that society. But this PRC is a global power as well. In terms of risk, I'll give you one immediately. First, on Chinese language, again, Mandarin. Because it's not just a China local issue. When these Chinese AIs generated so much content that all over the global internet, but that is a training material of any AI model, including US AI models using to train their AI. If you get the Mandarin information mostly produced by the Chinese AI, it's automatically poisoning your data. And that's a global issue. And then that translates to all these particularly non-English languages. Their view about China, their knowledge about China, or their knowledge about the world, about America, about anything, that if their information space is almost sort of embedded by these type of AI training model, even they think they are using a OpenAI model, for example, that still have that bias because the Chinese AI has generate that much content and influence. And then, of course, standard setting, right? Chinese products are pervasive and competitive. And then the Chinese companies will go to the international levels to get their standard setting more and more on an assertive and a dominant position. And then the whole world will sort of go under that direction. The other threat, another one, of course, is authoritarian countries. That those governments love those products. It serves their needs. Yeah, in the name of economic development and to upgrade their technology or social stability whatsoever. But once you're using that type of infrastructure for your data and information, there's two levels of risk. One is the civil freedom society in those countries are being further undermined. But second is those governments actually expose themselves under the manipulation and influence of PRC much more directly because these are the critical technologies. This is a trajectory even before AI or a large language model into space. But AI comes to escalated this process in a new level.
So the contest over standards and then the proliferation of equipment that dictators, wherever they may be, can use to tighten their crackdown, really important kind of threads of this struggle. Before we turn it over to our participants, I want to make sure we get in at least a few thoughts about what we can do in response. So David, starting with you on that side of things, one thing from the perspective of, in many of our private discussions that I've had at the forum, one thing that always comes through is the need for an alternative, right? If you're going with just say no to tech from the PRC, it's not going to be a very appealing message in a world where people and governments alike are really excited about the efficiency, the modernization, et cetera, offered by AI and other emerging technologies. So what can we do to think about really offering a positive vision that's also a democratic vision to counter the proliferation of digital authoritarianism? And also maybe how can the communities that you often work with engage with those of us in the democracy and human rights space on this front?
No, great question. And I think this is a challenge for all of us going forward. I think fundamentally it boils down to this friction between how we put values next to economics. To what extent we value democratic, liberal democracy or liberal democratic values next to cost. All of us have cell phone plans, right? T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T. When was the last time you used, when was the last time security of those networks was a factor in which plan you chose, right? It's more oftentimes coverage and cost than it is values or company values per se. This is a rough analogy to draw from US versus China technology applications. On the software side, to try to answer your question more directly, we have alternatives. This is the space where American companies dominate. Between Apple iOS and Google Android, that comprises of 99% of the global market share when it comes to mobile operating systems. And so there is a case to be made there that there is a US or Western alternative to Chinese platforms. On the hardware side is where it starts to get more complicated because China has a sprawling manufacturing industrial base. They make hardware at low cost. And in that hardware, they ingrain some of these authoritarian values or features or applications. And that's where we need to work better with our allies and partners to build a stronger global supply chain to make all these alternatives available to Chinese technologies. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks, David. And then Xiao, feel free to respond to that, but also two specific things I want to make sure to flag for you. First, human rights activists and civil society more broadly are facing particular challenges because of the advent of these authoritarian AI models. So if there are recommendations you would offer to that community in terms of adaptations, self-defense mechanisms, and so forth, And also maybe what kind of collaborations or support for that community from other types of stakeholders would you like to see in order to put us in the best possible position to confront the authoritarian tech challenge?
Thank you. For activists, we share the same values, but you're inside of China, behind of the Great Firewall. I understand how difficult and challenging in this digital totalitarian time. Moral clarity and individual resilience is forever needed and even more needed today. The trust networks, the collaborations without those platforms is for your survival. But outside of Great Firewall, there's much more we can do to expose the digital totalitarianism, the AI usage. Directly, I would say open source intelligence. Yeah, and to monitoring those AIs, including American AIs, but monitoring those Chinese AIs, holding them accountable and expose their propaganda and the distorted information that's part of it. When I say open source intelligence, now I'm speaking to directly the Chinese computer scientists, AI experts who are working on their state AI. Okay? You are also academics. You publish your papers. I know who you are. And I know who you collaborate. I even know sometimes where your funding coming from. Okay? Your names are in the history for your expertise contribute to the technology. Do you really want to carry that moral burden? And this is the struggle will never stop. Well, we ask ethical questions ourselves. We ask ethical questions of our companies. The civil society should understand this is not just a China issue, it has a global impact. And we work with academic researchers. We work with technology companies in the sense of building a better AI, building a freer AI, and to compete in this age of AI, and democracy will prevail.
Thank you so much, Xiao. To those of you online, this concludes the public portion of our event. So thank you so much for joining us, and please stay tuned for our next event and follow us on socials.